responsibility. Today is Monday. It is the 26th day of September in the year 2016, and obviously the month of September ends this week and we move into October. So far, our weather is not keeping up with that. We're still having summertime temperatures here, but I do see that they are expected to drop substantially by the time we reach the end of this week, at least here in Appalachia, and we're going to be down into the 60s as the high during the day. So that's more like it, I guess. But my heavens, have we had a beautiful run of weather. I guess an awful lot of the East needs some rain. I know we do. We're going to have the leaves coming down pretty quick, and if we don't get a little bit of rain, we're going to have a forest fire danger. I'm fairly certain. But be that as it may, it is absolutely beautiful. We've had beautiful weather now for a couple of weeks, and I hope as we prepare to do our 2-hour program on this Monday, I hope that your weekend has been enjoyable. And again, it's been 5 days since we've been together, and so many things have happened. Some of them negative, most of them negative, I guess you could say. But we had a couple of major passings in the sports world yesterday. Arnold Palmer, who's always been one of my heroes. I don't play golf. I never did, but I grew up loving Arnold Palmer and watching him, and actually became attracted to golf primarily because of him. I've heard people say that today in the remembrances of him, and in my case, it indeed worked. Because what little I know about golf, I know basically because of Arnold Palmer. And the one thing that I got out of that, I think, is that I could appreciate Tiger Woods when he was at the top of his game because of Arnold Palmer. If it hadn't been for Arnold Palmer, I would have missed Tiger Woods. I really do believe. So, anyway, and then we had that horrendous death of the Miami Heat, the Miami Marlins pitcher, Jose Hernandez. I think it was Hernandez. Yeah, I believe it was Hernandez in the boating accident yesterday. And I've just been thrown by that. 24 years old. Nobody 24 years old should leave this earth without having had more of an opportunity to make a mark, so to speak. And he was going to make one. He was one of the baseball's better pitchers, no question. Already people had been commenting on how good he was and the future that he had, and it's just a shame. And of course, we had the continuation of the disturbances in Charlotte that were rampant all during the end of last week and into the weekend. There's absolutely no question in my mind. I don't know whether the pundits would agree with me or not, but the Carolina Panthers took a beating yesterday, and they played in Charlotte. And there's no question that what was going on in Charlotte last week had to have taken its toll on that team. There's absolutely no question. They just were not themselves. Anyway, welcome to the Virtual Center. Today, as of course everybody knows, this evening, 8 hours from now, is the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And most of the polls indicate a virtual dead heat as we go into the first debate. Donald Trump has closed the gap that Hillary Clinton had opened with the conclusion of the Democratic Convention. And if you remember, people were beginning, and I was one, were beginning to believe that this could be a wipeout. And Democrats were frothing at the mouth, thinking about not only winning the Senate, but even the remotest possibility of winning control back of the House of Representatives. Now, the defeating Donald Trump is on at the forefront of everybody's mind, so to speak, because the polls are indicating that indeed this man could win. I put an item on Facebook a short while ago. I was reading this morning an article that appeared online in a publication called Flagler Live. It's in Flagler, Florida. And the editor of Flagler Live is a journalist named Pierre Tristam, Tristam. And I've mentioned Pierre before. He and I, after 20 years, I guess, have reconnected on Facebook. He began his career here in Beckley. He worked as a young reporter when I came back to West Virginia in the 1990s. Pierre was a reporter for the local paper here in Beckley, West Virginia. And he and I became acquainted and became pretty good friends, I thought. And one of the things that attracted me to him was his potential. I really believed that this guy was going to make some noise in journalism. He writes beautifully. He's perceptive. He's creative. He's, in fact, very honestly, he ruffled some feathers here in southern West Virginia because he was writing about some things and saying some things that people in this area weren't used to and didn't like. And no surprise, when he got the opportunity to move on, he did. And I really lost track of him until Facebook. When I got on Facebook last year, about a year ago, I guess now, maybe not quite a year, I happened to see one of his postings and took the opportunity to connect with him. And indeed, it was him, and we've kind of reestablished a contact of sorts on the Internet. Anyway, I saw reference to an article he wrote and published today, I believe, or maybe yesterday, on the likelihood, the possibility, and indeed in some cases, the likelihood that Donald Trump could actually win this thing. And Pierre was one of those people who felt that was so remote a possibility. Now he's not thinking that way anymore. And in fact, in his piece, he writes, and I want to read you a couple of things from him, if for no reason, so you can get the flavor. If you go on the website, the Virtual Center website, I have posted the link to this particular article if you would enjoy reading it. And I really do think that you ought to, if for no other reason, just to get the flavor of how this man writes, because I think he writes beautifully. He says, in reference to Trump, it's not really the lying, the vulgarity, the narcissism, the thuggery, the amorality, the violence, or the false piety that bothers me about Trump. That's not what bothers me. What bothers me most, he says, is that there's nothing else there. He has no idea, no ideology, no plan, no clue. Lies don't crumble empires, stupidity does, ignorance does, recklessness does. Take any of what passes for his proposals on taxes, defeating ISIS, lowering crime, addressing immigration. There's no coherence. Nothing computes. Ask him about it in person, and he rambles more insanely than Tina Fey's imitation of Sarah Palin. He is, as Garrison Keillor just described him, the biggest con job since the Trojan horse, unquote. And again, it's obviously a criticism of Donald Trump, but also I think his facility with the written word, I think, makes reading him so enjoyable. And I did want to give you that link here at the Virtual Center on the chance that many of you might enjoy looking it up. Just go to Flagler Live on Google, and you'll see that he is the editor of that particular Internet publication. And there's a whole list there of articles that he has posted over the last couple of years. And I've probably read 15 to 20 of them, and very, very creative, very insightful. Just a good journalist, I believe. Let me kind of share with you some of the housework that we usually do every day in terms of giving you the opportunity to get on the air and sharing your thoughts with us. We do have a phone number, as you know, and at the beginning of each hour in our program, I try to remember to give you that phone number on the chance that during the ensuing hour, if the inclination strikes you and something occurs to you that that you feel would be worth calling in and sharing your thoughts and ideas with some of our other listeners, I invite you to do that. And that's why we have the phone number. The number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to share your ideas with me directly and trust me to get your ideas on the air, I'd be more than happy to do that if you just drop me an email. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, lowercase, all one word, at gmail.com. And then, of course, now as we're approaching, I think, a year that we've had our Facebook page up and running. And for those of you who are comfortable and use Facebook on a regular basis, just go to the home page, and in the search box at the top of the page, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. And I have taken to posting a number of things on the Virtual Center page, Facebook page. Articles that I think you might enjoy reading. One of them, obviously, is the Pierre Tristram piece on Donald Trump's campaign that we just made reference to. That's on there. I've also put links on there over the last couple of days on a number of issues. One of them I particularly want to share with you at early into our program today. It deals principally with higher education, but it's an excellent article, and it raises some interesting questions. And I really thought that in order to be consistent with some of the things that we've done before here at the Virtual Center, I would be remiss to not share this link with you. So it also is on our Facebook page. It was an article that appeared in our Charleston, West Virginia Gazette yesterday, I believe. And it's an excellent, excellent piece. I picked it up this morning, so actually maybe it is in today's paper rather than yesterday's. But anyway, I'll give you the reference in a moment. I do encourage you to check on a regular basis on our Facebook page for the Virtual Center, because in my reading, if I come across something that I think our listeners might find enjoyable or might benefit from, then I usually take the opportunity to post the link. And one of the things that I've done, and I've been very consistent, I have to basically credit myself because I told myself I was going to do this, and so far I have. And that is, I have not put any links on our Facebook page without reading the particular piece. In other words, I'm not going by the title, and I'm not going just according to, well, this title is something that our listeners might look for, and without reading it myself. I wouldn't do that. And so I make sure that I read it first so that I can basically confirm that indeed this is something I would like the people who regularly listen to the Virtual Center, who give me that honor. The least I can do is not waste their time by referring them to articles that I haven't even read myself. I won't do that. And I haven't done that. And so consequently, I've taken to making some comments about the pieces that I've posted on our Facebook page, the links that I've posted. I've said something about the article so that you can be the judge. I've tried to tell you what I see in the article and why I felt that you might enjoy reading it. And if you agree with me, great. Then all you need to do is click on the link. And if you don't, then by all means, feel free to not read it. But again, I feel like I owe you the opportunity to get some insight as to why I put this particular connection, this particular link on our website. And I've been fairly meticulous in doing that, and I'm glad I have. For one thing, it keeps me reading, keeps me up to date, so to speak, and I do think it makes it much more valuable. Some of the links that people have sent me, I look at the thing and I'll think to myself, I wonder why they really sent me this. I'm not interested in this. Whereas if I had had a couple of ideas at the outset, and had some idea as to what the person was thinking of when they sent me the link, and that's really that's the frame of mind in which I put these things on our Facebook page. So again, if you just go to the search box and type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page. And before we came on the air today, Bob Kincaid and I were chatting. And if you call our number today, 304-663-4676, into the Head On Radio Network studios, I believe we'll be getting Bob. Bob Kincaid is in the studios today, and he and I were chatting before we went on the air, and about some of the things that we've seen over the last couple of days. And I don't know how many of you follow Facebook regularly, but at least our efforts on Facebook. But Bob posted an item yesterday on Facebook that really had me reeling. It's about the political campaign. And it is a sign that Bob saw along the roadside in the county of West Virginia in which he lives, Fayette County. And the posting basically urges citizens to make the determination about their candidate by whether, in fact, the candidate takes his initiative and his guidance from the Bible. And, basically the argument is if the candidate that you're thinking of voting for doesn't openly acknowledge that he takes his directions from Scripture and does what he is urged to do by Scripture, then you shouldn't vote for him. This is something that when I entered this particular race, a number of people warned me about this and basically suggested that I would most likely run into this. And this is the first out-and-out example of it that I've seen so far. But with the election more than a month away, I'm sure it's not the last one by any means. And I've prepared a relatively short, it's all on one page. It's a piece on religious freedom. And I think I've shared it with you before here on the Virtual Center. It focuses on James Madison's role in his remonstrance on religious freedom, in which he was able in 1786 to get the Virginia legislature to adopt this principle in order to protect religious freedom in Virginia. And basically the situation that really prompted the issue at that time was a proposed tax on all Virginians in order to support morality, the growth and increase of morality in Virginia. Madison was able to see very clearly that this really didn't have a whole lot to do with morality, but it had quite a bit to do with the Anglican Church. And in reality, what this particular legislation would have done would be tax all citizens in the state of Virginia, all citizens who pay taxes, to support the Anglican Church, whether in fact they attended that church or not. In other words, there was nothing in the law that required they attend the Anglican Church. But even if they didn't, they had to go along with the fact that the tax money was being used to support it. And it was based on that particular principle that Madison put together his remonstrance and was able to defeat that law in the Virginia legislature, and at the same time, with his remonstrance, make the case that the only way to preserve religious freedom in a diverse, pluralistic society comprised of a number of different religious denominations, not all of them Christian, rather Jews and Mennonites and various other things, various other religious denominations as well, and including those who really didn't have a particular or a favorite religious denomination, atheists, if you will. The point was that Madison's position was, and this was what he wrote in the Remonstrance, that the only way to protect everybody's religious freedom is to make sure that government is kept out of the religious question entirely. The minute government gets into the situation, into the issue of religion, that automatically means that certain people are going to win and certain people are going to lose. And that violates the principle of religious freedom for everybody. Basically, Madison's position is that these kinds of questions are matters of individual conscience. They are not matters for government to legislate upon in any way. And this basically establishes the principle of separation of church and state as the only way to preserve religious freedom. We've done this before here at the Virtual Center. Well, I put together a position paper, and I'm getting ready to release it to the local press here in southern West Virginia. And basically, it explains Madison's position, and obviously includes one or two well-placed quotations from James Madison. But rather, the issue is to alert citizens to be on the lookout for exactly this, which is the efforts of people in particular religions to encourage their parishioners to merge, if you will, their religious beliefs along with their political preferences, and to use religion as a way to evaluate political candidates. And when I saw that, Bob posted it on Facebook yesterday, I just had to react, because I've been afraid of it. It scares me to death. It's unfortunate and it's wrong. Because the implication, of course, there are a number of implications here, but one of them is that you evaluate other people and the morality and character of other people with a criteria that basically says how close their beliefs conform to your own. In other words, you are accepting or rejecting political candidates based on what they believe, not what they can do, not their commitment to the state, not their commitment to serve citizens, not their expertise in areas of the economy or in social services or anything else. In other words, you are not giving candidates credit for anything they bring to the political table. Rather, you are using their particular professed religious beliefs to make the determination in a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of all or nothing decision. It is wrong. It is unfair. It is dishonest. It is immoral, I believe. It is at least unethical. And the implication is that the only people worthy of your support are the people that totally agree with you. I think we're engaged in a political campaign where these kinds of questions are on everybody's tongue, on the tip of everybody's tongue, so to speak. We are in a society that people are increasingly defining as divided and partisan. And it worries a lot of people, because the concern is that after the election's over, we're going to have to live with each other. And there are a number of us in this society from different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different nationalities, different languages, different religions, different races, different skin colors, different ethnic backgrounds. We have to be able to live together in peace and harmony. And if you start to use the degree to which people conform to what you are as the criteria, then by definition, you are discriminating against those who don't. And you are potentially creating a problem in a society where division and pluralism is an ongoing problem. It's one that government's principal responsibility is that you're feeding the fires of division and hatred and bigotry. It has no place in our political system at all. And I don't think you can go to anybody with more credibility on this than James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. They basically laid it out. Read Madison's remonstrance, in which he makes 15 specific arguments as to why this is wrong. And let me just share with you one of the particular arguments he makes, because I think it is absolutely brilliant. Madison says that one of the dangers of bringing religion and politics together is that by bringing government into the picture, you are imposing your views, your will, on other people. And what that means is, and Madison states this a lot better than I can, what that means is that you are denying other people the opportunity to discover truth for themselves the way you theoretically or most likely discovered truth for yourself, by finding it out for yourself. And if you've been given that opportunity, then others deserve that same opportunity, and you are denying them of that opportunity by imposing your beliefs on them and not giving them the opportunity to discover truth for themselves. It's not that they won't end up agreeing with you, but it needs to be them, these people, who make that decision, not you. And I think that's the issue. And I appreciate and I thank Bob for putting it on Facebook yesterday. But I got to tell you that for a couple of hours yesterday afternoon, it was pretty much the focus of my attention. On a football Sunday, nevertheless, because it disturbed me that much. I think it's extremely dangerous. It's very dangerous to the society that we live in. Another link that I put on Facebook, and I did make some comments about it. In fact, if you'll permit me, I'll share a few of those comments with you, was an article, and this is the one that I mentioned a few moments ago. This was an article on West Virginia higher education. And the article was in the date of it was written by Ryan Quinn, and the publication date was September 24th, which was Saturday. And the title of the article is West Virginia Higher Education Board's Current Needed Powers Debated. And the link is on our Facebook page. And when I read this article, it's extensive. It's quite a lengthy article. But the detail in it is brilliant. And I made kind of a half-hearted, tongue-in-cheek comment at the very end of the entry that I put on Facebook saying that I would recommend a good bourbon or a good scotch as you read this. And what I meant was it's pretty tedious because there's a lot of higher education policy included in this article. So some people are going to find it laborious to slug through it. And a good bourbon or a good scotch sometimes is the way to deal with that. But the point that I would make is that this particular article, I believe, is extremely significant. It's significant for what it says and what it implies, And while it particularly applies to West Virginia, the message here goes well beyond West Virginia. Because basically all of us are tuned in to the role that higher education must play and is expected to play in the nation's economic development, and more particularly in preparing our people for the challenges of the 21st century economy in terms of skill development, in terms of job availability, in terms of the attractiveness of entrepreneurs who are looking for places to locate where they believe their business has the best opportunity for success. There's a lot of that going on. And obviously, higher education plays and is expected to play a critical role in that. So consequently, when you run into an article like this one, which addresses dysfunction in higher education policy making at the very top of the administrative ladder, it raises questions for concern that all of us need be aware of. Here in West Virginia, of course, that issue is particularly acute because West Virginia's economy, to use the word that seems most appropriate, seems to be in free fall. And what that means is the one crop economy, so to speak, that West Virginia has been based upon for the last century, for the last 100 years, which is coal, is rapidly dying. And West Virginia has not developed the policies and programs necessary to diversify the economy in preparation for this. This is a criticism of our political leaders, of our political parties in the past. It's a criticism of the voters who have pretty much been conned by interest groups, by fossil fuel industry groups that have encouraged citizens to continue to support the kind of policies and candidates that will take their marching orders from the fossil fuel industry. West Virginia has marched down that road in lockstep for 100 years. And now the state is paying the price because as the coal economy declines and diminishes, there's little, if anything, at least so far, to take its place. Consequently, the role that higher education in West Virginia must play in order to turn this state's economy around is vital. And when you read a detailed study like this article by Mr. Quinn, which addresses dysfunction at the very upper levels of administrative policy making, it's disturbing. I would suggest that in laying out the problems here in West Virginia, it gives those in other states a number of things to look for in their own states as well. I don't think any of us can afford to assume that this particular issue or this particular problem is West Virginians alone. I have to believe it exists in other places. Of course, my interest is here. And I know many of the people listening have interests in other states as well. But the issues raised in this particular article, it seems to me, draw people to the key questions to ask in making sure that higher education in your state is in tune with the economic priorities of the people in that state. Here in West Virginia, it's dysfunction. Basically, what this article, and again, the link is on our Facebook page, on the Virtual Center Facebook page. It is West Virginia Higher Education Boards. It deals with the upper echelon of policymaking in higher education in the state of West Virginia. Let me just kind of give you, a little bit of that story. I happen to be. This is one of the areas I'm been very interested in for a long time, because I really spent my professional career in higher education, more than half of it here in West Virginia. So my interest in West Virginia higher education has been pretty sharp, pretty acute for a long time. Up until about the end of the 1960s, up until about 1969, I believe the date is, higher education and policy in West Virginia, policy decisions were being made by the State Board of Education. And the state of West Virginia, and I'm sure other states did the same thing, we had one state level one level board for both higher education and K through 12 education. The assumption, the thinking in political circles during that period was that education is education, and the same group of people should be responsible for making policy decisions, whether it in fact involved K through 12 schools or whether it involved higher education as well. And up until the late 60s, up until 1969, that seemed to be the rule here in West Virginia. In 1969, there was a major administrative change. The state of West Virginia, the legislature, in its wisdom, I'll use that in quotes, and I don't mean to be necessarily negative, because I don't think the decision itself was a bad one, began to recognize that some of the issues and some of the problems in higher education were unique to higher education, and that higher education ought to have its own policy-making board. With that in mind, the legislature created the West Virginia Board of Regents. And the Board of Regents began to make all policy for higher education in West Virginia for the colleges and universities, public colleges and public universities. Private colleges and private universities had their own administrative structure, their own governance structure. But the State Board of Regents oversaw the policies and priorities of public institutions of higher education in the state. At that time, there really weren't community colleges. There were four-year colleges, and then there were two major universities in the state, Marshall University in Huntington and West Virginia University in Morgantown. After a time, under the Board of Regents, the legislature revisited the issue of higher education and determined that the state colleges really were different enough from the research institutions, West Virginia University and Marshall University, that the two systems should have separate governing boards. And so the regents, the Board of Regents, was replaced by two separate boards, one for the two universities, research universities, the other a board of directors for the state colleges. That occurred in 1989, I believe. And then from the late 80s into this new century, higher education in West Virginia was divided between the board of directors for the state colleges and a separate board for the two research universities. In the early 20th century, 21st century, that system was further refined. And we have what we have now in West Virginia, which is what is called the Higher Education Policy Commission. HEPC is the acronym. which makes policy for the public four-year colleges, and a separate board that oversees policy for the new community college system. And West Virginia, in the last several years, has opened a number of community colleges, obviously believing that community colleges would work much more closely and much more in tandem with businesses. And so the thinking is that community colleges would engage in training for business, whereas the colleges and universities would continue to approach education in their traditional ways, as it were. And again, we still had a separate entity for West Virginia University and Marshall University. And that's the current system. We have a board for community and technical colleges and the Higher Education Policy Commission for the colleges and universities. And now many of the former state colleges have indeed become universities as well. And that's really the focus of this particular piece that appeared in the Charleston Gazette on this past Saturday. Because there seems to be a major disconnect between what these structures, these organizational structures at the state level, believe they can do and should be doing, and what the legislature believed in the legislation that it passed, giving them the authority to do their job. Just recently, there was a major audit of higher education in West Virginia. And that particular audit was published just last week. And in that audit, there are serious questions raised about administrative dysfunction in West Virginia higher education. More specifically, on what these governing boards should be doing, ought to be doing. The argument is that the state appropriates $3.5 million a year to support these two governance structures, the Board for Community Colleges and the Higher Education Policy Commission. The total budget for the two of them is $3.5 million. And the audit raised serious questions, namely, what are the taxpayers of West Virginia getting for their $3.5 million? One of the things that became particularly clear in recent years is that many of the decisions which the legislature assumed would be made by these bodies when they were created have been passed on down to the institutions themselves. Clearly, the institutions have become much more autonomous than anybody ever believed. And so consequently, state-level governance structures created to make major higher education decisions in the name of and in behalf of the colleges and universities in the state have divested themselves of that authority and kicked it downstairs to the administrative structures of the state colleges and universities. In effect, what that means is that major decisions are being made by individual college presidents and their home boards of governors. And I can remember when I was still employed at Concord University about 10 years ago, the transition from Concord from being a college to becoming a university. The legislature approved this, not only with Concord, but for a number of other state schools. And I can remember the debate at Concord as to what changes becoming a university instead of just being a college was going to mean internally for the college, for the institution. Many people, and I was one, believed that the transition to university meant that the responsibilities of the institution to the communities in which the institutions were located were enhanced by the change in status. State colleges are just that. They are colleges. They educate students theoretically and equip them to secure jobs or to go on to graduate school and provide the kind of education that we've talked about. We looked at the Yale report from 1828. We talked about the so-called traditional liberal arts education and what it involved. That's where the state colleges were. But once they become universities, I believed, and many other people at the institution believed also, is that the responsibilities for community were enhanced by this transition, this change in status. And that whereas the institution had functioned for 120 years as a freestanding college, and what happened on its campus, within its walls, was clearly its own business, so to speak, except that it was managed at the state level in terms of budgets and tuition rates and all the rest of it. The thinking was that with this new status of university, the institution would be expected to do things for and on behalf of the community in which it was located that it hadn't been asked to do before. And the thinking was that's what the legislature had in mind when it passed the legislation changing the name from Concord College to Concord University, or West Liberty State College to West Liberty University, and on and on and on. There were a number of them. Well, this audit pointed out that in reality, while a lot of people thought those kinds of changes ought to have happened, the fact of the matter is few of them did. This board continued to believe, according to the audit, that all it had was advisory responsibility for the colleges, that the real decisions needed to be made at the institutional level. Issues related to curriculum, programs, termination of programs, introduction of new programs, tuition rates, how much students needed to pay for attendance. All of these decisions were pretty much being made at the institutional level. And institutions were merely going through the procedure of getting approval from the state governing body. But those people managing the state group, the chancellor, and members of the Higher Education Policy Commission didn't really believe they had really any responsibility to do anything but rubber stamp the recommendations coming to them from the specific colleges. The legislation creating the Higher Education Policy Commission, for example, stated that when an institution wants to raise tuition more than 5% in any given year, it has to make the case for that increase before the state board, the Higher Education Policy Commission, and that request for tuition increases over and above 5% needed to be approved at the state level. The audit points out that almost never did the state organization or structure decline to approve a tuition rate increase. In effect, the state board was deferring to the institution. Consequently, the tuition rates for students have continued to go up and up and up. And in this article, the chancellor himself is quoted as saying that as the state legislature reduced appropriations for higher education, reduced the appropriations going to particular colleges and universities, that meant that the institution had no choice in order to preserve itself except to make up these deficiencies in appropriations by raising tuition. And the commission just basically went along with that and rubber stamped the recommendations or the requests of individual institutions, believing that in the best interest of the colleges, the best thing that they could do was just to go along. And the question that the audit raises is, what are the citizens of West Virginia paying $3.5 million a year for? If these organizations, these structures, believe that their only role is advisory. And the chancellor himself made the point, we don't have the authority to terminate academic programs or to tell a college that it must terminate a particular program because there aren't that many students enrolled in it. It's a low enrolled major, and it's not turning out the number of graduates needed to sustain the program. Therefore, the institution has to go about terminating that particular program. The chancellor made the point in the article that he doesn't believe that he or the board that he heads has the right to do that. All they can do is recommend to college presidents and financial officers of the institutions that they need to look carefully at this particular program, which is not paying off. It's not producing the kind of revenue it needs to produce in order to continue to sustain itself. And so basically, the article addresses major dysfunctions in the higher education administration in the state. We have a candidate running for governor now, the Democrat Jim Justice, who is making higher education, as well as K through education, what he calls the economic engine which is going to turn West Virginia's economy around. It seems to me that in the face of that promise to citizens, this dysfunction, as revealed in this article, becomes critical. Because basically, it seems to be a fact of life that most of the major decisions are being made at the institutional level, not at the state level, even though the legislature believes the opposite to be the case. So the question is, and the audit raises this question, what do we do? Where do we go? I'm running for the House this year in West Virginia. My concern, my interest is that this question is probably going to end up on the agenda of the next legislative session. And it disturbs me greatly that some of the people making these decisions, which are monumental decisions for the future of West Virginia, aren't really competent or qualified to make them. In fact, what disturbs me even more is that our current legislative majority is taking its marching orders from special interests outside the state who could care less about the economic turnaround in West Virginia. And if the entire future of higher education is going to be debated at the next legislative session, I want to be part of that. And I want other people who have the same concerns that I do to be with me. So I think that this particular issue is vital. And it really does indeed bother me. Let me give you just one or two examples, and I know we're heading towards the top of the hour, and we'll take our 5-minute break, and then we'll go on to a different topic, hopefully. But unless you have if you have calls, by all means, feel free to pick up the line and call into our 304-663-4676 number and be heard. We would love to hear from you, and we can do that at the beginning of our second hour. But let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. All of this sounds well and good, whether the decision ought to be made at the institutional level or whether it ought to be made at the state level. But logistically, it stands to reason that the major issues, the so-called universal issues of economic growth and the skill needs of employers around the country and around the world, these kinds of decisions, it would seem to me, are best made at the higher levels, not the lower levels, not the local levels. Because there's no way in the world the people at the individual institutions can know the kinds of changes and the kinds of nuances that higher education must make in order to meet the needs of a dynamic, changing world economy. So it seems to me that logistically there's a problem of making so many of these decisions on the local level. But it even goes further than that. Because Chancellor Hill himself made the comment that one of the board, listen to this, I think this is incredible. One of the major roles that the Higher Education Policy Commission makes is to make decisions or rulings that affect particular institutions because presidents and boards of governors find them uncomfortable to make. In other words, if the decision to terminate a particular academic program and eliminate 3 or 4 faculty members, tenured faculty members in the process, that's a tough administrative management decision. And Chancellor Hill's argument is many presidents are uncomfortable making this kind of a decision because their goal is to continue to cultivate the goodwill of all the faculty and all the students and all the people at the institution. So to make an unpopular decision like this would be very difficult for them. So consequently, the state board has traditionally been the bad guy. It's been willing to make those decisions, when in reality it's the institution that's making it. But the people at the institutions and the citizens of the state don't know that. In other words, the board is pretending to make decisions that it's not really making, only to let local administrators of the institution off the hook, so to speak. Wow. $3.5 million budget for that kind of thing, it seems to me, is somewhat disturbing. And then again, there's the issue of who makes these decisions within the individual institutions in question. Because all of us know that within every institution, there are particular interest groups, factions, that emerge. And their factions are very local and very self-interested. They're looking out for job security. They, if it is up to them, they'll never terminate a program. Rather, they spend their time coming up with facetious arguments as to why a particular program ought not to be terminated, even though there aren't any students in it. So if you allow the decision to be made at that level, then you're letting the last people qualified to make the decision make it. It seems to me. And so what we get into then is who's making the major decisions at the institutional level. And of course, the way to alleviate this is to have many of these major decisions made at the upper levels. I know from my own experience, for example, that classroom instructors were making policy decisions about which directions the institution ought to go in, which populations it ought to serve, which populations it should not serve, whether in fact it ought to have programs off campus, or whether we ought to require citizens to drive to campus to take all their programs. The point of view being, if these students are unwilling to drive an hour to come to class, then they're not really serious students anyway. We'll be better off without them. In a state desperate for economic turnaround, that kind of thinking, that kind of provincial, self-interested local thinking is very bad for the institution and for the state, let alone for the citizens. So it seems to me that this particular article raises some very, very pertinent questions. And I hope that I've been able to take a little bit of time here at the Virtual Center to clarify them. I think, again, while these particular issues relate to West Virginia, the fact of the matter is many of these issues exist outside West Virginia in many other state systems of higher education as well. What we're talking about here is organizational structure and organizational behavior. How individuals behave within organizational structures depending on where they are and what their priorities are. And again, if you think about it, that's exactly the same thing that James Madison talked about in Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 51 when he talked about factions. And ultimately his goal, his dream, was to elevate major decisions to a level which was above and only minimally influenced by local factions and local self-interest. And therefore, the best interests of the community, the general public, taxpayers, citizens, and the state would get priority attention. That was Madison's goal in number 10. Isn't it ironic that some of these decisions and some of these issues raised in what seems to be totally different contexts become valuable in looking at new issues that come up in a totally new day? The wisdom of an appreciation for the past and those who lived it, it seems to me, continues to grow. And I particularly become more and more fascinated with the insight and the vision that many of these people seem to have and some of the questions they raised and the way they went through the kind of intellectual analysis necessary to resolve these questions. We've gone a little bit beyond the top of our hour. It's 5 minutes after the top of the hour, 5 minutes after 2 in the East. We're going to pause and take our 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we'll get into a totally different topic here on this Monday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Welcome to our second hour here on this Monday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 26th day of September in the year 2016. It, of course, is the afternoon before the very anticipated first presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump this evening. I think it's significant that those are the only two candidates that will be there. The the third party candidates did not qualify for the debates this evening. But there's absolutely no question that with the race, the polls indicating how close the race is becoming, the votes, however many there are, that these two candidates poll, the Libertarian and the Green Party candidate, could have, as we remember in the 2000 election, could have a very, very dramatic effect on the outcome. So all of these things are important. Welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center. If you are just joining us, welcome to you. If you have been with us through the first hour, then you probably got a little bit more of higher education policy making than you ever really wanted. But it's an issue that obviously I have an interest in because I was so close to it for so long. And I'll be honest with you, for many of the years that I was in higher education administration, I didn't understand a lot of this stuff. And it's not that I was too close to it to really understand it. You were, as a member of an administration, whatever that administration happens to be, you were pretty much, what you knew and what you didn't know became pretty much a factor of how the particular president involved managed his administrative team. There are different kinds of management style, as we all know, and I won't go into those. I've become a little bit verbal on a few of those as well in recent years. But the fact of the matter is different people manage in different ways. Some people have absolutely no trouble delegating authority and responsibility to members of their administration, believing that as members of the administration, they were hired because they have particular skills and particular abilities. And the only thing that a good manager can do, realistically, is delegate authority to these people so that their skills and their talents can become useful to the institution. And so the theory behind this particular approach to management is that the ideal would be for the good manager is that everyone on his staff, on his management's team, so to speak, is more competent than he or she is. That if you are successful in assembling a team of highly qualified specialists in a number of different areas, then the good manager knows the best thing to do is just get out of the way and let these people do what they're best qualified to do. But then you have other managers who are really afraid to surrender responsibility or authority to anyone. They want to make all the decisions themselves. And the way that they are able to do this successfully is to control the flow of information so that everybody on the management team doesn't have access to all the information that's relevant to the way they do their jobs and the environment within which they do them. In theory, then, the top manager controls the flow of information and makes sure that each administrator receives only the information that the president, in this case, chooses to make available. So consequently, you know your own area, but you don't know everybody else's. And the fact of the matter is, if higher education is going to work, it's because everybody else's area interconnects with your own. And the ideal policy is when everybody works together and pulls in the same direction, so to speak. There's a talent to that, and everybody doesn't have it, very honestly. So anyway, welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center. For those of you who are just joining us that weren't with us in the first hour, you can probably get an inkling for the fact that a good portion of our first hour was spent on issues related to higher education policy making. And it was driven by an article that is, the link to which is on our Facebook page. So again, let me give you the details of how you can play a more involved direct role in our program. If you would like to call and get on the air and share your thoughts or your ideas, your vision, your questions, or whatever with our other listeners, then we have a phone dedicated for that particular purpose. Just pick up your phone and dial area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to make your thoughts known and you'd rather trust me to get these issues on the air for you, then I would be more than willing to do that, because the key issue here are the issues themselves, the insights themselves. So if you drop me an email, I'd be glad to do the best I can to get your ideas and your thoughts across to our listeners. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's W-A-O'Brien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906, all one word, all lowercase, at gmail.com. And then again, let me remind you about our Facebook page. In fact, the higher education article that consumed a good portion of our first hour today is on our Facebook page. The link to that article is on our Facebook page. And the article itself appeared in the September 24th West Virginia Charleston Gazette. So if online, if you'd like to go directly to it, just type in wvgazette.com and look at the articles dated September 24th on the opinion section, and you will find this particular article on higher education policy in the state. And again, one reason I mentioned it took so much time in our first hour with this article is that while the issues, the questions at hand pertain specifically to West Virginia, the fact of the matter is these are questions that affect higher education policy making and administrative structure throughout the nation, not only in higher education, but in a number of other service areas as well. It seems to me they raise important questions about structure. I think more and more we're becoming aware of and familiar with the realities of structure, how the organization is structured, how a particular organization is set up to function, pretty well determines what it will accomplish and what it won't, how effective it'll be and how effective it won't be. And we all know that there are examples out there of managers, not only in education, in a number of other fields as well, who set up bogus operations and organizations to create the illusion or the inference that key issues and considerations are being addressed, when in fact they aren't. And so it becomes more of a PR effort rather than an effort to solve problems. We all know that exists. Sometimes it's hard to find, hard to spot. That's why a particular detailed study like this particular article on higher education is so important, because it kind of gives you the idea as to what kind of questions to ask and where to go for the key answers. Because the fact of the matter is, if there's something going on, then it's likely that some of the people involved don't want anyone else to find the answers. So they're not going to tell you where to go. But by looking at issues like this and thinking about discussions like this, it seems to me they give us some insights as to where to go in order to unearth some of the most important information about why particular organizations and institutions are or are not effective. So with that, so again, if you'd like to be heard, I invite you to pick up the phone and call our phone number, area code 304-663-4676. The issue that I'd like to open this second hour with, and I appreciate the fact that we're already 20 minutes after the hour, so we're already 20 minutes into our second hour. But the article that I'd like to open this hour with is somewhat related to the first hour. It's not totally distinct, totally separate. But it doesn't deal so much, at least directly, with education as it does with economic development. In other words, I'd like to address a particular article or a particular perspective that I think is a very valuable insight for all of us who are really thirsty to understand how these kinds of issues work. And the name that I'd like to introduce you to is the name Enrico Moretti. M-O-R-E-T-T-I. Enrico Moretti. He is an economist who teaches at Stanford University. And let me tell you how I've come across Enrico Moretti since the last time we were together here at the Virtual Center. In the last 3 or 4 days, I was in my car, listening to NPR, National Public Radio. And it was in the evening news program, All Things Considered. And Ari Shapiro, who's one of the regular hosts on All Things Considered for NPR in the evening, interviewed Enrico Moretti on NPR. And I was in the car and I listened to this interview. It only lasted about 5 minutes. I thought it was absolutely incredibly insightful. And so I made up my mind when I got home, I'd go online and I'd find out what I could about Enrico Moretti. And I did. So let me share a little bit about him with you. In 2012, Enrico Moretti published a book entitled The Geography of Jobs. The Geography of Jobs. And what he is doing is looking at the issue of economic development from a perspective that all of us recognize to be very important, but not all that many people address it. What Moretti points out, for example, is that there are something like 320 metropolitan areas in the United States, urban areas, big cities. But all of them are not in the forefront of economic innovation and economic growth. Rather, only a small minority of them are. He calls them brain hubs, H-U-B-S, brain hubs. And what he means by this is the kind of metropolitan area, the kind of municipal community that attracts brain power, where things are happening, where growth and diversification is happening, where opportunity abounds. And somehow it seems that that opportunity doesn't peter out. That in a real brain hub, change occurs. And so in that particular metropolitan area, one emphasis of growth tends to be followed 15 or 20 years later by a totally new area of economic growth. And the fact of the matter is, the entire area becomes an organic, dynamic whole. It becomes an exciting place to be. It becomes the kind of place where opportunities abound. it doesn't necessarily mean that only college graduates and engineers can benefit from this. One of the findings that Moretti's research leads him to is the fact that in these brain hubs, so-called, even high school graduates, even people that never crossed the line and took a college class in their life are finding opportunities that don't exist in other areas. And what he finds in the brain hubs that he identifies, and he talks about 15 or 20 of the major ones, what he finds that even incomes of high school graduates tend to be higher. The standard of living, quality of life, tends to be higher than it is for many people with college degrees in other metropolitan areas that are not so-called brain hubs. One of the chapters in his book, The Geography of Jobs, compares Silicon Valley with Detroit. And the first thing I was thinking of when I caught that is how many people have actually thought about Silicon Valley and Detroit in the same sentence ever. Moretti has a whole chapter in his book, The Geography of Jobs, on a comparison between these two places. And what he points out is that in the 50s and 60s, Detroit was a brain hub. It was where the automobile industry thrived. If you were into automobiles or any of the spin-off areas associated with automobiles, you had to be in Detroit or you were nowhere. The jobs were plentiful. The quality of life was high. Opportunities were immense. The expansion of the suburbs was rapid. More and more people were doing well in metropolitan Detroit and were living a standard of living that matched how well they were doing. People were able to buy homes out of the downtown area in the suburbs. Transportation improved. Shopping malls grew up overnight, so to speak. And the area was dynamic. It was a place that people wanted to be. And then, for reasons that I think are worth all of us reflecting upon, it all began to change. Other countries began to manufacture cars, especially at the beginning the Japanese. Hondas and not Volvos, that's Swedish, but Hondas and Toyotas especially. Nissan. If you remember, Nissan began as Datsun. And these foreign automobiles began to flood the American market. And the quality of life in Detroit began to decline. And it seemed like there was no way to deal with that decline. Detroit was unable or unwilling to come up with alternatives, with the kind of diversified economy that would allow it to develop other areas besides the auto industry. Instead, Detroit ended up in head-to-head campaign for automobile sales with manufacturers around the world whose labor costs were less and whose automobiles could undersell ours. And the auto industry found itself in this spiral going down and down and down. The people who could afford to get out did. much of the brain power left. Many people began to relocate. And other so-called brain hubs began to replace Detroit. And Detroit became what many of us today hear, especially in the political campaign, kind of the capital of the so-called Rust Belt, where a whole way of life, when American manufacturing drove the ship, so to speak, began to fall apart. And that's what Moretti talks about, is the comparison between a brain hub that can continually renew itself and one like Detroit that can't. A lot of it is tied to citizens. A lot of it is tied to education. A lot of it is tied to industry. And a lot of it is tied to political leadership. But the fact of the matter is, some sort of a combination of those would seem to be the villain in trying to explain the decline of the standard of living in Detroit. But here's the key to Enrico Moretti's research. What Moretti finds is that communities need to understand the essentials of a brain hub and need to engage in the kinds of policies and decision making that allow brain hubs to flourish. Silicon Valley has been able to do that because of the transition from heavy industry to the so-called information age, to technology, to the age of the internet. Silicon Valley has been able to attract all of this brain power. It is clearly a brain hub. Another one is in the so-called technology corridor in western North Carolina, which is one of the reasons why the situation in Charlotte over the past week is so disturbing to so many. Because Charlotte and that region has become a mecca to employers and industry and educational institutions. Duke and the University of North Carolina and North Carolina State and Wake Forest and many of these institutions in North Carolina that have played such a dramatic role in the emergence of the brain hub that is the technology corridor in western Pennsylvania. And there are others. Columbus, Ohio, Madison, Wisconsin, Boston. Boston has long been and continues to be a major such hub. It's tied up with colleges and universities. It's tied up with the caliber of people who live in the community. But the fact of the matter is the caliber of the people demand a quality of education for their kids, which keeps the beat going, so to speak. And that's what Moretti is talking about. That's the essence of his book, The Geography of Jobs, of opportunity, of social mobility, the opportunity for people to relocate from an area of no growth or little growth into an area that is dynamic and promises to continue to remain dynamic. That's the book that I want to introduce to you, entitled The Geography of Jobs. I played around this weekend with the idea of getting that book. I didn't think that I could get it read in time to get it on the air, because I really think, given the debate that's going to happen tonight between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I think the whole issue of jobs and economic expansion and all the rest of it is going to be vital. So I wanted to get this Moretti conversation out there in time for tonight's debate, because I think this kind of perspective can inform all of us as we listen to the debate and we listen to the ideas and the answers to questions of all of these candidates. But I was able to go to NPR's website and pull up the interview that I heard between Moretti and Ari Shapiro. This is the interview that really got me hooked on Enrico Moretti, and here's why. Ari Shapiro was asking questions about economic development. And of course, I'm in southern West Virginia here. Issues related to economic development are issues that I'm interested in, as I think many other people are as well. And Ari Shapiro raised a particular question about what the president can do, a president can do, to boost American economic mobility. What kinds of policies and programs can an elected president engage in that will promote economic development? And the issue in the conversation was the difference between these so-called brain hubs that Moretti talks about in his book and the interests of infrastructure and the allocation of public money for building roads, canals, and bridges and railroads and improving our communication structure, our infrastructure, so that economic growth can happen. Moretti's belief is that while infrastructure is important, he says, I think infrastructure investment might have positive effects on economic growth. But, he says, I think that by far the most efficient way to increase economic mobility is to invest not in physical infrastructure, but in the human capital of the American workers, meaning their education and their skills. Dollars invested in people are the way that you build these so-called brain hubs, Moretti is arguing. It's not the existence of roads and railroads and airports and by themselves. It's the caliber and the quality and the creativity of the people in the communities that make growth a reality. And all of these other things, the improved roads and canals and such, contribute to that. But Moretti points out that the key factor is the investment in people, the investment in what he calls human capital. He says, I think most economic studies point to the fact that the dollar spent, the public dollar spent, in investing in education as some of the highest return, both for workers and for society, relative to pretty much any other public investment we can make. So I think investing in pavement, in bridges, in roads might help. But investing in education, training, and skills will help much more. Basically, what Moretti is arguing is that economic growth is driven not by roads and bridges, but by the quality and the caliber of the people in those communities. It goes right back to the issues we were discussing here on the Virtual Center in recent weeks. the issue of how we educate our people to do what? Here in West Virginia, for example, and I'm using this as an example because I'm here, and I think I can speak to it in ways that'll be more beneficial and will make my point. You can talk about economic diversification all you want. You can talk about the benefits and the value of a diversified economy. The way that the state of West Virginia has looked at that issue is doing everything that the state can do to make the state inviting for entrepreneurs, for people who are willing to come in here and invest in the startup of businesses. And the state is willing to give them tax breaks, some of them fairly lucrative tax breaks, for a number of years in order to keep them here, in order to make it financially beneficial for them to locate here. The issue, of course, comes down to the quality and the caliber of the workforce. And that's where I believe this particular state has been deficient. Because we need to go back to one of the major issues that research has revealed to us in recent years. And that is that those nations that are the richest in natural resources, timber, oil, coal, iron ore, etc., tend to put their resources and their investments principally in the natural resources that are there, extracting them to the detriment of citizens. The wealth and the growth is in the land, is in the earth. And in order to extract that wealth, you don't need highly sophisticated, highly educated people. You need muscle power. And that's the way coal and gas and these other things have begun and have flourished.
Hey, Dr. Bill.
Like West Virginia. Yes, Bob.
With the added benefit there that if all you need is muscle and you don't bother to educate anybody, people become much easier to control in the future. But that's not why I bothered you. You've got Horst on the line for you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, Horst.
Hey, Dr. Bill.
How are we doing?
Oh, well, we're doing okay so far. I have to mention that we do have some heavy weather coming in this evening.
I know. I saw that storm you put on Facebook.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, the particular location I'm in is we're about as situated as well as you can get to miss most of these things, but this one seems to be coming more or less down on top of us, so we might get a little bit of stuff. But it's not here quite yet. We got the leading edges, the winds, and then after that we get mostly probably a lot of rain. Could be some flooding around here, but hell, hadn't started quite yet. So I can still I can still get a clean signal out. I hope I'm coming in clear. I hear you great. So
I hear you great also.
Oh, terrific. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt the topic you got your teeth into there. That sounds
you're not interrupting, believe me.
Well, no, the premise of that book sounds pretty interesting. I'd like to check that out myself. But as you mentioned, for the next day or two, we kind of got other stuff on our plate, I suppose.
Right. I know.
What can you do, right?
Don't we ever?
Yeah. Oh boy. But as it were, yeah. Actually, I had a couple of things I wanted to just ask you about, like just nuts and bolts stuff during the election season here for you personally.
Okay.
I missed your opener for the program tonight, so I don't know if you've already gone into this or not. But I assume that you're in the thick of your own campaigning right now,
right?
So I assume that means that you don't have a lot of time for doing the program here necessarily, or you're going to have a lot of conflicts. For the next.
Well, so far it hasn't been that much of a problem, but I really do anticipate over the next 3 weeks or so that it will be. I'm starting to. My appointments are starting to pile up. There's a number of events. I have one this evening, for example, that I'm attending, and the calendar for weekends especially becomes pretty heavy. But and again, no matter what you do, you always you feel like you ought to be somewhere else doing something else, you know. But you can only do so much. But it. But I'm trying to hang in there because this program is so important to me and has been so important to me that I don't want to let this slip, you know, at all.
No, I understand that. But that's, you know, at the same time, like you're undertaking a really big responsibility there too, potentially anyway, right? So I mean, like that was the other half of that is I've been kind of curious, like supposing that things go well, and you get the seat, is what happens to this? I mean, have you gamed that one out? I mean, like
I really haven't, and I've been afraid to do that because I don't want
a conflict of interest or something like that. I know,
I don't think so. I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah.
The logistics of actually doing the program on a regular basis, I've thought of. One of the things I thought of, for example, was maybe talking to Bob down the road about a format change, maybe doing an hour a day for 5 days or something, or rather than a couple of hours, 3 days or something like that. But you know, I mean, we can find a lot of ways to do this. I just don't want to let this go because it's not only has been important to me, but I'm arrogant enough to believe that from people I talk to that they find it valuable as well, and that's kind of spurred me on. And I'm not gonna squander that opportunity, you know.
Well, I'm foursquare in your corner as far as that goes. No
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
But yeah, it's one of those things I've kind of it's nagged at me a bit, you know, going back to like the last couple of months. I just wonder, you know, people who do like an over-the-air broadcast, you know, often have to give that job up when they actually enter into public office. Yeah. But with the internet, I don't know if that makes a difference or if it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then number two, like hopefully you would expect that your time you're going to be pretty busy.
Yeah. I hope
other
so.
Things also. Yeah. Well,
but but I've actually forced myself to not think about those contingencies because I got to get there first, you know.
Well, sure.
And I'm some days I'm optimistic, some days I'm not so optimistic, but and that religious thing that we had over the weekend on Facebook, that kind of threw me. I told Bob, and then I addressed that at the very beginning of the program today in the first hour.
Okay.
And all I pointed out was that, you know, for a couple of hours on Sunday, and it was a football Sunday, but I really couldn't get that out of my mind. I mean, I was just going around and around with that. I had to run upstairs and alert my wife to it, and I said, "Here it comes. You know, it's there. The signs are up. You know." And I'm going to have to deal with this. And I have put this thing together on religious freedom, and I'm going to put it out this week. And
oh, great, yeah.
But very honestly, the people who will subscribe to what was on that sign are not going to read my piece anyway. So, you know, I realize that. I'm just hoping that enough people who will, you know, if that makes sense.
The thing that bothers me about that, it's a certain kind of visceral advertising that, you know, the people that will respond to that, you know, if it hadn't been put there in the first place, might not have ever even thought about it, or a lot of them wouldn't have. To me, it's dirty pool, but it's the worst kind. But you know, like you say, here it comes. Brace yourself. It's politics.
It's there, and it's there in the nation, and it's gotten Donald Trump a pretty long way.
Oh,
you know,
boy.
I mean, he is absolutely the master at some of this stuff. I mean, for a guy that continually professes to the fact that he's not a politician, he's one of the shrewdest politicians I've ever witnessed.
Well, you know, considering what modern politics has devolved into, it's become the science of appealing to the lowest common denominator. And,
He's basically running. His campaign is a graduate course in Montesquieu. I mean, not Montesquieu, Machiavelli.
Machiavelli, yeah.
Machiavelli, yeah. Because he is really putting this thing on wheels. I mean, it's just amazing what he's been able to do. I got to tell you though that I was so impressed with your piece on Facebook about this religious thing. I just thought it was great.
Oh.
I really did.
Oh, that. Right,
you were
right.
You're right.
Observant, non-observant Christian.
Yeah.
Now that's something that's been kicking around the back of my head for probably, I don't know, a couple of decades even. I mean,
yeah.
But you see it like evolving or developing in a lot of different ways. It gets well, I don't know about unmistakable, but in the light of like that Rob Smith article I passed to you a few weeks ago.
Right. Right.
When you start looking at these as cultural and I hesitate to say evolutionary things, but but there's a certain strata, that
yeah.
You start here, then you move up to here, then you move up to here, and
right.
And when you really kind of take that model on board, then the whole concept of a culture war really takes on a significance that you just didn't even see before.
Yeah. Well, this business that we've just been talking about now about this Moretti stuff on the so-called brain hubs. I mean, this ties in so well with this because that what he's talking about has no room for this kind of stuff. This stuff that we saw on that sign, and these people that are living, with their heads in the sand, I mean, they become liabilities rather than assets.
Right.
To the kind of thing that Moretti's talking about.
But it's clear evidence it's like two cultures just talking completely past each other.
Oh yeah,
it's almost like dog whistling, but or just like a completely different language.
Yeah.
And Moretti, and I think about Moretti, and I think about people who evaluate things on economic lines, or like the Senate. I mean, like the works that you've cited,
right.
or that Harry has brought to our attention. I mean, all that is brilliant, and it really lays a lot of things into a certain kind of perspective. But it kind of resides outside of that. If you could just pull all these things together and look at it, you would see like a sort of a sort of I hesitate to use words like stratification or hierarchy or things that suggest that one is better or superior to the other.
I understand where you're going.
But you really looking at things from a completely different level.
Yeah.
Like a good analogy might be like if we're all climbing a ladder, the people towards the top of the ladder get to see more than the people down below.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
But I kind of envy you. In a lot of ways I don't, but in certain ways you're going to learn. You get to put all your historical study from the past decades into real hard practice when you go into this election.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how many insights and how many ahas and connections you're going to have. Just
oh my God,
that you haven't already.
I just got one. On Saturday I went to a local picnic, and there were about 250 people there. It was well attended, and I knew a number of people there, and a number of people I hadn't seen for several years, but they were all there. And one of the people that came up and introduced himself to me. Actually, I knew him. Used to be a regular caller when I had the talk show locally here in 2000 to 2005. And he would call 2 or 3 times a week. And I got to know him pretty well. And I had met him at that time in a few places and events around, but I hadn't seen him recently. But anyway, he was at this picnic on Saturday, and he was talking about my campaign, and as the thing was breaking up, he came by and said, and basically he said, you're going to be if you win, he said, hopefully you will, but he said, you know that you're going to be confronted with some real ethical and moral issues. And, you're going to be confronted with people who want you to do things that you really won't do or can't do. And have you thought about that? And I said, oh, yes, I have, and all of that. So then it was almost like he had read the sign that we saw on Facebook. And he said, just remember to keep Scripture right at the forefront of your mind and don't do anything that it tells you not to do, or something like that. And I thought, and I because he's a good guy.
Yeah, sure.
And he had my own best interests at heart, but he said it was saying exactly the wrong things to me. And but I didn't argue with him, and say, I just kind of thanked him for the thought and his good wishes and that kind of thing. And what I told him was, I think we both know me well enough to know that I'm not going to do that. That I'm going to make the decisions that are the best. But
that's somewhat cryptic advice to my point of view. But I if let's say supposing that you are versed in Scripture to the point that you actually make a quote here and there to back up what you're trying to say, I could see that. But as far as behavior goes, I mean,
no.
How would you? Who's there to measure?
Oh, I mean the potential and that thing on Facebook there, the potential for discrimination, and I mean it's just. And North Carolina, we've been talking about North Carolina's economy, but my God, they're getting pelted over this religious freedom reaffirmation act or restoration act which is the same thing they tried to pass here in West Virginia. I mean, and the majority in the state is promising to bring it up again, and it's discriminatory. And when an amendment was added, which said specifically there's not to be any discrimination, a lot of the people that supported it backed up and said, hey, there's no reason to support it now because they wanted to discriminate. That was the idea.
And these things indicate to me a simmering. Again, it's a culture war. It's between one side that is more or less the majority, but there's a significant faction that are just not having it, and that's why we see repeated laws that are obviously from the moment they're signed destined to go to the courts, get overturned, cost the state millions of dollars in litigation, and it's a lost cause from the beginning. But people just absolutely refuse to accept where we are going, our cultural moment. And they're not allowed. Hey, Dr. Bell, I'm sorry, I got you up against it. I better.
Oh no, you're fine. Hey, listen, it's great to hear from you. I'll tell you, and the communication, the quality of the sound was perfect. You sounded great. You sound like you're right in the same room. It's fabulous.
Yeah, great, terrific.
Thank you, buddy. I
really
appreciate
good here too.
Wonderful to hear from you. Listen, be careful in that storm.
Hey, tell me something. Are you going to be programming tomorrow too, and the rest of the week, or?
I'm planning to. Yeah, I'm planning.
All right. Well, I'll tune in. I'll catch you later.
I'm planning to, and if anything happens, I don't know about it yet.
All right.
Okay, thank you, my friend. Great to hear from you.
All right.
Well, we're at 58 minutes after the hour. I guess we just got enough time to say goodbye and thank Bob and the folks at Head On Radio Network, and thank Horst and all of you who are listening and have been listening to today's program. As Horst said, we will be back tomorrow. We start a half hour later on Tuesday. I was a little bit hesitant because I'm having some car issues, and we're kind of struggling with one car, and I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. But as of this point, I'm very optimistic that we'll be here and I have a plan. I kind of know where I want to go, and it's based a little bit on today's program as well. So if I don't do it, it'll be a kind of an 11th hour decision. But right now, I hope that we'll be able to get together again tomorrow at the Virtual Center. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Enjoy the weather before it turns colder. We're on the final days of summer, so to speak. So if that applies to you, please enjoy them. Enjoy the debate tonight. I say that advisedly. I don't quite know what that means. But the most important thing is hug those that you care the most about, because things have a habit of changing so fast for so many people. And have a wonderful evening. Thank you for listening. And hopefully we'll be back together again tomorrow. Thank you.